My name is Brian Kinnan. This topic is about moving to the cloud. This is going to be recommendations for choosing a cloud service provider. First, I want to talk about a couple different options you have with cloud services. You have IaaS, SaaS, and PaaS. IaaS, as you can see, is going to be your infrastructure as a service, and this is going to be your VMware, Amazon, and Microsoft solutions. Your PaaS solutions are going to be your app stores, such as Microsoft App Store, Apple App Store, and then we also have SaaS, which is going to be stuff like Office 365 and Gmail. This is stuff that is easily going to be accessible, or really going to be accessible from a website. With IaaS, there are a couple different options we can look at, even really with all of them. Cloud in the traditional sense was thought of as a public cloud where we're going to take and move everything out there, or we're just going to move this whole website out there. And that's going to be the public cloud, which is the second bullet point listed there. We also have a private cloud, which is one you can bring in-house, and that's going to be something like VMware. There is community clouds available, and this is going to be your SourceForge and other things. On-prem is the traditional way of looking at it. This is where all your servers are local. This is where everything is still stored local. This does not really include any cloud-based options at all. The last option is hybrid. Hybrid is where you take that cloud and your on-prem and you combine them, you mix and match them. This is going to be great when you're looking at something like overdrafting, where occasionally you may need additional services from a cloud service provider that you really don't want to buy a server for. Or cloud bursting, where every morning at 10 o'clock you're going to have this large sale and you want to have additional storage or additional CPU cycles available. You can actually go out and just rent that, and then at 10 o'clock every day it's made available to you and you can push or offload that stuff to it. Dealing with SLAs is the next topic, and this is where once you figure out, yeah, I do want to move to cloud, framing the contract. How do we want the contract to look? This is where we review all of our assurances and guarantees. This is where we go through and look at the contract that's presented to us and look at areas such as support, security, privacy. Make sure that they're dealing with and outlining exactly the way that you want them to. Make sure there is stuff in there for incident response and reporting obligations. Make sure they have enforcement clauses in there. When you're dealing with stuff that is free, typically these are one of the first things to go. Also, when you're dealing with different services, don't lump all your SLAs into one. Your email SLA and your SLA for maybe your file services are going to be different. Make sure they're outlined different. Make sure that they're specific to that service. Make sure stuff like timeliness of response, make sure the reporting are outlined specifically in there. Additionally, with free service providers, you're typically not going to get a penalty for stuff like downtime. If that is the case, if that's a need for you, make sure that is outlined in the contract. If they can't give it, it might be worth, or it would be worth bumping up maybe to the $5, $10 a month, whatever that next increment is, just to get that penalty included. Approaching cloud security can be done from a couple different areas. What we see is the first thing you want to do is create a baseline of your current servers in the areas of security management, identity management, data redundancy, and services availability. Create that baseline and take that with you to your cloud service provider. Say, here's our current baselines. We need you to match or exceed these. And that will give you a great approach going forward with security. Make sure that information security measures are in there, especially around voluntary auditing and certification frameworks. Stuff like PCI and HIPAA really require that. It really requires that you offload some of that responsibility to that provider to make sure that they're following up on their end of the bargain and closing any security holes around those. And also with the auditing, especially in those areas, for those two regs, you have to be able to go through and yearly prove that you're meeting or exceeding those guidelines. And this allows you to do that. If you don't have that SLA, you may not get that information back. Locality problem. This is going to be huge when dealing with governmental contracts, even higher education contracts, research contracts. Locality problem is when you're trying to figure out where your data is going to be stored. You want to make sure that if you're here in the US, make sure it stays in the US. You don't want your data being stored over in Germany, over in China, because you're not sure how your data is going to be treated over there. You're not sure what jurisdictions your data is going to fall on. With your cloud service provider, it's the same thing. Are they headquartered here? Or are they headquartered in China? If they're headquartered in someplace like China, they're going to fall under China's rules and regulations, and therefore your data is going to be subject to those same rules and regulations. Make sure that you're comfortable with both aspects of it. Privacy enforcement. And this is really about protecting not only your users, but also your consumers. Anyone you're selling to, anyone that's using your stuff, your service, whatever you're offering. This is protecting them by creating a policy or a management policy that comes through in that SLA and says, this is how I'm going to treat my users. This is how I'm going to treat my consumers. Make sure that there's some type of cryptographic solution in there. Most SaaS providers now include that, but not everyone does. So make sure that they go through and include that in there. Make sure, for instance, if you're hosting a website, that SSL certificate is spelled out somewhere. Whether you're buying it or they're buying it, make sure it's spelled out in there. If privacy is required in either IIS or PAS, consider all solutions, not just the one that the vendor provides. With vendor-owned solutions, they may not be as robust as you want them, or they may suffer some type of lag, or they may just not be the full breadth of offerings that you want. So look at other third-party solutions, especially when you're dealing with key management servers and access policy servers. Make sure that they're as robust and as stateful and as granular as you need them to be. Also, if you're moving data, see if it's possible to encrypt that data before you move it out to the cloud. Sometimes with cloud service providers, the biggest loss or the chance of loss actually comes during the initial move, the initial migration out there. Find out if there's a way that we can encrypt that data locally and keep it encrypted as we move it out to the cloud, and then have it stay encrypted once we get in the cloud. Loss of control issue. This is one of the bigger issues, one of the two big issues that IT looked at when we saw cloud coming down. And that's, oh, we're going to lose control. Okay, losing control is really, losing control never really transpired in the way that most people thought. With a business owner, that doesn't mean that you can be lax on it though. Make sure there's transparency around the provider's procedures when it comes to your data. Make sure they're not throwing in just generic or common contract language around your data. Make sure that you leave no doubt on how your data is going to be accessed and how it's going to be manipulated. Make sure they can't just go in willy-nilly and move your data or change your data in such a way without either you knowing or you approving it. Additionally, vendor lock-in. With vendor lock-in, in the case of a bankruptcy or shutdown scenario, you need to be able to move your data. If you have vendor lock-in, if you're going to some place where that data can only reside on that server and function on that one server, one service, that's going to be vendor lock-in, and it's not going to allow you to move and look at other providers in a shutdown or bankruptcy scenario. Make sure that your data migration is possible. Is a provider here to stay? And that goes back into that vendor lock-in. With those bankruptcy procedures, we have a lot of young and startup companies really in the cloud service arena. Okay. As they go through this cycle, we know some of them are going to fall off. Make sure, once again, you don't have vendor lock-in. Make sure your data can be moved out of that current service into a similar or another service provider's offering where you're not going to lose your data, where you're not going to spend a lot of time and money and effort to make that transition. Or maybe it's a case where you just like another person's offering. If that's the case, you still need to be able to move that data, but you don't want to spend a lot of money and time doing it. Also, a lot of what you're seeing right now, due to the young nature, is that a lot of solutions are designed for a specific business context. Okay? If that's the case, make sure you have it specifically spelled out what can and can't be done. If you're looking for something where you can eventually broaden or extend that service, make sure you look outside of that specific business context scope and see if maybe there's another way to do it. Maybe it's a case where you hire someone else out to do it and they host it in the cloud for you, or maybe it's a slightly more expensive party that allows you to take your data and expand it as you see fit or as you need to down the line. Additionally, take into account data protection needs. Once again, when dealing with governmental or medical data, there are specific regs and rules that need to be addressed. Make sure that your data can be moved, make sure it is secure, make sure it's following all those regs. Lastly, appropriate staffing. The second biggest issue we had with IT that we saw coming down the cloud was the need, or was that we felt we might be losing our jobs. While that's partially turned out to be true, the jobs have actually just shifted. Instead of me managing this server, now I'm managing this service in the cloud. So instead of me managing email on this server and handling everything around it, I am now managing email, but I'm doing it so where I'm interfacing with the cloud service provider. That has allowed companies to take their IT staff and free them up to work on strategic items that are strategic for your company. Additionally, make sure you don't forget about training, not only for end users, but for anybody else that's going to be impacted by it. That is the biggest cost, and that's also going to return your biggest benefit in bang for your buck. Thank you for joining in. I have included references for our team. I've also included references for some of the stuff we talked about here today.